real. Black don't crack, baby. What drove you to want to focus on Black masculinity?
You can't be the same you on the other side of this. I'm Jamie Foxx. This shouldn't be happening to me. I remember coming home triumphantly that night and telling my single mother that I'm a man. Like today, it happened.
I can't tell you how many Black men that I have in my life that I have to remind to take their butts to the doctor. Do I have to reach out to you? Yes.
And so by the time we get to Trump, I'm like, that makes sense because now he can be angry.
Man.
Miss Tashara Parker.
You could just be your whole self.
I knew that I wanted to do something to have impact.
You actually testified before the Texas Senate.
We just want to exist.
Representation matters. You can make a difference every single day.
Show up authentically, loud and proud as the person that you truly are. We're still having a conversation.
Oh my God, I'm gonna get emotional.
The internet's favorite cousin.
I appreciate you showing up as your natural self.
This is a good question, Tashara.
Thanks for bringing it up. Nobody ever brings up.
You're pretty good at this.
We have a lot more coming up. I wanted to see in action.
We're so happy to have you on Loud and Clear. Okay, so today, hold on. Y'all know I'm country. Okay, no, today's episode, our next guest, one of the things that he mentioned, hey brother, take care of yourself. I can't tell you how many Black men that I have in my life, family, friends, that I have to remind to take their butts to the doctor, to rest, okay, to take care of yourself. So this episode is all about Black men, Black masculinity, what we can do as caretakers to make sure our Black men are taking care of themselves so they can continue to do this work. One of the things that we mentioned throughout the episode is grow through what you grow through what you go through. We ain't editing that out because that's what this is all about, authenticity. So welcome again to the Loud and Clear Show with Tashara Parker, where we amplify stories that challenge, inspire, and hopefully make you think a little bit, okay? Today, I am sitting down with Dr. Brandon Manning, a scholar, storyteller, and cultural critic whose work discusses the role Black masculinity plays in America. Through his groundbreaking research, he examines how humor, satire, and vulnerability serve as tools to challenge stereotypes and redefine what we perceive as strength. His insights not only explore the past, but also lay a foundation for future generations to reclaim their stories and identities, which is something that we know we need these days, especially in 2025, this new era. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Loud and Clear family, let's welcome the brilliant Dr. Brandon Manning. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. And yourself?
I'm good. I'm good. I do have to start it off with this because this was one of the main reasons that I reached out to you. Obviously love your work. But the title of Black masculinity, I feel like that's a phrase that gets people to like their ears kind of perk up like, what the heck is what they talking about over there?
Right.
So what drove you to want to focus on Black masculinity in some of your research?
Yeah, that's a great point, a great question. I was a young father, and since the age of 20, I've been raising my two boys, and then I had my daughter come along, and really it was just, I think, an extension of me trying to be mindful in the way that I was raising them alongside my wife, that really just had me think about those choices in terms of how you pour into your children, how, like, what it means for them to grow into the men that we want them to be. And so that was largely it. Also, my first book was around humor and satire.
Yes.
And, you know, I'll probably be dating myself here a little bit, but when I was in undergrad, I was watching Dave Chappelle all the time and followed very closely when Chappelle came off air. And so much of that seemed to be wrapped up in his performance of masculinity and gender. And so it really just made me want to kind of dive in and explore a little bit more why and how Black men first are gravitated towards humor and comedy as a space where they can kind of share themselves. But then two, what the world makes of that move towards humor. Is laughter a way of like not engaging?
So in your research, what have you found and what can you teach us, you know, about Black masculinity as it relates to satire and culture and everything that's kind of intertwined into? I know we would need a whole course at TCU to actually be able to know all this stuff, but I'm just saying, help us summarize a little bit because we want to educate the people around here.
Yeah, you know, one of the things is I think really important when we're looking back in terms of African-American literature and history is that really since Frederick Douglass in the late 19th century, the country has always been invested in this kind of race man, this kind of singular form of leadership, and across Frederick Douglass into thinking about W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, and then obviously on them through Martin Luther King Jr., and into the present, we've always looked to that like one person, and it's oftentimes been a man, and it being a man has left a lot of things sometimes by the wayside. That dynamic also replicates itself in humor. And I think the country feels like if it can laugh at a thing, it's healed from a thing. And so when black men then take the stage in front of mixed audience, from Richard Pryor to Jamie Foxx's most recent.
Ask you about that. Okay, go ahead.
What had happened?
Yeah.
I think that there's a giving of themselves, but there's also a way of trying to put their finger on the pulse of race and gender in this contemporary moment and how they make sense of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you just mentioned Jamie Foxx, and that was certainly going to be a follow-up question after you started talking about David Chappelle and all the other individuals that you followed. But I watched Jamie Foxx from a consumerism standpoint, right? I'm consuming this information and this knowledge, and I really wanted to know what had happened. Please tell us.
Right.
So when you watched it,
did
you come from that same perspective, or did you come from the perspective of, man, I got all this research back here and I'm seeing you perform, but have you healed in what it's been a year or so since the situation? When you watch it, what did you take away from that performance? Because I'm looking at it like, man, I ain't seen no Netflix special like this. I thought it was incredibly, I'm a production person, producing. I thought it was incredibly well told. I'm also a storyteller. So I'm looking at it from that perspective. What did you see?
Yeah, that's a great question. I when I first watched it, I was really taken aback. I'm beginning to write for the second book, and am thinking about how to build on some of the things that I talk about in the first book. And one of those central ideas is vulnerability, and black men and vulnerability, specifically the ways that black men find that they can share their kind of emotional inner life, how they can create community, how they can do all of these things. And I've been looking and thinking a lot about Jared Carmichael's Rothaniel. It's another stand-up routine where he does this kind of community engagement, because most times stand-up comics don't want the community to talk or to have the audience to talk to them, right? And Jared Carmichael invites the kind of audience into this kind of shared therapy space. And I really saw that replicated in Foxx's most recent stand-up routine, because you've got folks there saying, you know, Atlanta saved your life. And there's this kind of shared space that's usually not what happens on the stand-up stage. And it's a beautiful thing. And beyond that, what he does with that community is be extremely vulnerable. You know, there's something extremely powerful seeing Jamie Foxx, who says in the routine, like, I'm Jamie Foxx, this shouldn't be happening to me, really grapple with his own mortality in front of us.
And feeling helpless too.
Feeling helpless, kind of surrendering a bit to that and crying and being vulnerable, inviting his daughters onto stage. And so we get a bit more of a kind of intimate take of Foxx in ways that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to have, maybe had this not happened. And so,
What do you think from a standpoint of what that shows other men, black men in particular, to see him get up there and, in so many words, surrender? Right? To everything that he endured over the last year plus. What do you think that says to those, not just in the audience in the room, but the virtual audience, other people who are out there just watching this?
I think it says so much, right? In part because I think the fact that it was a medical emergency, what is it? Men live longer if they're married to women. The whole discourse around toxic masculinity is really, when I talk to my students, it's like a double-edged sword, right? It is both a way of articulating the fact that men largely move in realms of anger. And when you think about violence and these other kind of things, the way that it gets perpetrated, but also kind of the violence that men do to themselves in terms of not taking care of themselves, not going to the doctor, not checking on themselves. And so I feel like beyond just the vulnerable piece and him being emotional in this kind of public space, it's also really big that it is around this kind of medical piece and him figuring out what his path through that is, right? And you know, one of the things that I think was one of the really important takeaways from it was, you know, as he's talking to the therapist who's trying to help him get back on his feet, she says, you know, you can't be the same you on the other side of this. I need the new Jamie Foxx. And so I think in many ways what we saw during the routine was a new Jamie Foxx, kind of unapologetic, spiritual, in ways that we maybe don't know Foxx in these ways. And so, I mean, it was really kind of beautiful to see just kind of another blossoming of Jamie Foxx.
I love that you use blossoming, because I feel like we grow through what we grow through. So I love that you use that. How does your book, Played Out, critique the stereotypes often associated with Black men?
Yeah, so oftentimes the way that humor gets picked up historically, it was through this kind of very racist imagery and iconography of blackface minstrelsy, if we're going back to turn of the century. And Black men were standing on stage and then in television and radio, performing, you know, caricatures of themselves. And so it's been interesting to see how Black men take that desire for laughter, that desire to see them perform, and then undermine it and change the terms of that. And so it's that I feel like that's how it largely takes care of the stereotypes. That coupled with the fact that, you know, I'm always interested in how Black men engage like physical comedy or, you know, there are certain tropes that are kind of true across different stand-up routines. I'm always interested in who and how folks wear leather.
Wait. Explain what is it?
I mean, like from Live from the Sunset Strip, Chris Rock, Eddie Murphy, during their biggest routines, they are all, looks like hot as all outdoors in nothing but leather.
And Jamie Foxx just had leather
on. And so like there are some things that are like low key, and even Wanda Sykes during one of her major and so like as you're like thinking about engaging in the kind of masculine space of the stand-up stage, it oftentimes comes with its own sartorial kind of choices in terms of dress and how folks, you know, are fly on stage, and that in and of itself is its own kind of performance.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I never even would have. Again, I'm watching it from a storytelling, a production, how they weave all these different pieces together, not even considering that even just your method of dress, what you put on, is part of the storytelling, so to speak.
And this genealogy, this community of comics that, you know, I think are oftentimes in the same community and are referencing each other. Yeah.
Good stuff, man. I knew I had to reach out to you. Yes. I want you to share an example, if you have one, where satire has effectively challenged perceptions of Black masculinity.
Yeah. So the first book, it really focuses on sketch comedy and novel-length satire. So I do a bit around Dave Chappelle and how he ends up leaving the Chappelle show. I also have a chapter on Key and Peele.
Yep.
And the chapter on Key and Peele, and specifically the anger translator, is I think one of my favorite sketches, reoccurring sketches, but also chapters, because there's a moment where you know, fiction becomes fact. And you've got Luther, the anger translator, who then comes on stage with Barack Obama at one of the White House Correspondents Association dinners. And that's, you know, the thing that I love about the sketch is that for Luther, you know, the initial sketch opened up, I want to say January 2012. And it was at the beginning of Obama's second term. And Obama had been largely critiqued that first term for being too stoic,
straight-laced,
too professorial,
and
not emotional enough. And one of the things that I write about in the chapter is that I feel like the country wanted to tap into what they thought a Black masculine rage was and figure out how to have that work for them. And so by the time we get to Trump, I'm like, that makes sense. Because now he can be angry, he can be unfettered, and it doesn't have any conditions. Exactly. And so then Luther, the anger translator, allowed for Key and Peele to be able to speak through what we know to be the kind of coded language we have to do as Black folks, being in corporate America, being in predominantly white spaces, wherein we can now translate or have translated for us our emotions and reading through the lines. And so the Luther the Anger Translator sketch, I think, did that brilliantly. And then when Obama himself invites Luther on stage with him, it's like a full circle moment. And he's like, look, now that, I'm in my second term and towards the end of it, I can tell you all or have translated for me how I really feel. Yeah.
I do want to ask you that because you mentioned Trump and how President Trump now is able to just say and pretty much do, what he pleases when he pleases. And so I know President Obama would not have been able to do the same things, or if he did, wouldn't have been perceived the same way.
Right.
And so I ask you from a standpoint of Black masculinity and vulnerability and, everything else that we can tie into it. What do you say to, the public in a sense of like, he couldn't do that at that time, right? You have any advice or feedback on that?
Yeah, I think so much of the way that Obama is read in that moment is there was, I think, a focus by a lot of America waiting to see if he would be angry in those ways, right? And I think part of the reason why he ended up being that first Black president in the way that he was because he controlled that very well. But so much of what he does offer up in terms of emotionality is oftentimes a kind of sadness. I remember post Sandy Hook, post Trayvon Martin, and people were frustrated at his sadness, right? They were frustrated when he said that Trayvon Martin could have been him or his son. They were frustrated by his affective and emotional kind of responses to these things. That coupled with the fact, the other thing that he gave us was unabashed coolness.
Yes.
And so
he got so much swag.
He got so much swag, and that in and of itself is its own kind of Black masculine performance. It's kind of cool posing and what it means and how Black men have historically used coolness and swag and whatever else as a way of making sure that they can at least present themselves as being unbothered by the world.
Come on.
And even though it offers an armor, it also has this kind of, it has this other cost associated with it. And so, but he was able to do that in real time for the American people. And so anger was definitely off the table.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Key and Peele already, but how has modern media like Kendrick Lamar's music reshaped the narrative of Black identity?
Yeah, no, love Kendrick Lamar, love thinking about hip hop, J. Cole, mining it for these various spaces. I think that they've done a fantastic job, hip hop in particular, in terms of offering different ways that Black men can look and be. Part of what I love, for instance, about J. Cole is he performs a kind of introspection. Like, what does it mean to be mindful? What does it mean to be meditative on how you move through the world? And so one of the things that hopefully I'll be able to kind of write about soon is about him, J. Cole, removing himself from their beef and what that looks like as an act of brotherly love. Even though within the discourse of hip hop, he was running, he didn't want the smoke or any of these other kind of things. And so what does it mean to really prioritize community and the people you love and the ways that you know how to love. So.
And even the music that he dropped after the fact, I think he's been very outspoken and out loud about, like you said, looking, internally about, how this looks, not just between the two of us as artists, but just in orbit, in the world, how people are perceiving this. We're going at it when we can be, brothers in this. So, I love me some J. Cole too. Yeah. So happy that you mentioned it. I do want to talk about the dangers of tokenism, especially when it comes to media, academia. How do we move beyond that?
Yeah, that is a great question. I routinely teach my students about W.E.B. Du Bois and this idea of double consciousness. And it's this idea that, for Black folks, they are always having to not only think about themselves as free, moving subjects, but also the way that others are perceiving them in real time. Black women, when you think about that, is another layer on top of that, right? And so, for my students at TCU, at a predominantly white institution, in this moment, that rings very true for them. They know what it looks like and means to be the only in the space and feel like they have to perform in a particular way to be the only me in front of the classroom. I know what that looks like, as do a number of folks in various spaces. Tokenism is a very important kind of thing that we can navigate. Part of Black folks have created a number of different responses to struggles historically. One of them is like the politics of respectability, where we're trying to figure out, like, if we can present ourselves as respectable, if I can come in here with this jacket and this button up, then maybe I'll be worthy of being treated like a person, right? And no one else really carries that kind of burden. We've got places where it is like illegal to sag, right? But if you were alternative and had your buckles and your wide pants and whatever it is you rocking, that's just understood as a form of self-expression. And it doesn't carry any kind of legal or, heaven forbid, like you being alive at the end of the day, kind of consequences associated with it. And so kind of what I've always told my boys and folks is that just know that you're being perceived in these particular ways, but try and not allow it to dictate how you move, other than just knowing what the consequences are, because those consequences are real, right?
They are real.
And so when you're tokenized and made to stand in for everybody, it can be a bit of a burden, but we also need to check kind of those moments and those assumptions that we have to move into those that representative or kind of role.
You mentioned how certain people can be seen doing some of the same things that maybe we have to, button up to do as a form of self-expression. So I do want to ask you, from a standpoint of young Black creatives, right, who do want to express themselves in certain ways, how do you help them, or what do you tell them when it comes to continuing to reclaim their stories today?
That is a good question. So I've got both of my sons now. My oldest is about to be 20, believe it or not. And he plays basketball for TCU.
Wow. Hold on, wait a minute. You say 20?
Yes.
Wow. But I'm going to say it because it's my show. Black don't crack, baby. Go ahead on now. Go on.
But he plays basketball at TCU. My younger son has just signed and will start at UNT for football.
Congratulations, man. That's
you.
Beautiful.
Yeah. In January. And so while it hasn't been so much around Black young creatives, it has been what it means, especially for these Black boys, to be in these predominantly like sports worlds, and what it means for them to grapple with their body feeling like it's no longer theirs. What it means to have fans say anything online, or coaches.
Talk about it.
And so part of what I think we all have to do is figure out what our set of investments are. What is it that we want to say? I found myself in this first book kind of being bound by humor and satire, but really called to speak more broadly about masculinity. And so like this second book is going to be me no longer kind of controlled or kind of hamstring by the vehicle of humor or satire, but thinking about masculinity more broadly. And so I think for everybody, it's what is your set of investments? What are you trying to convey? How can you say that? And the more that you can figure out that best method to do that without losing part of who you are and what that initial message is, the better. But you've got to do your homework to figure out the how. Part. Yeah.
People don't research these days.
Right.
They ain't researching. I had somebody on the show earlier and they was like, I'm gonna date myself. We didn't have Google back then. I was like, look, you ain't dating yourself. You mean you have to do some real research around here? So yeah, people just gotta continue to research. And I was talking to someone earlier when it comes to the subject matter experts that we use when we're doing our research and who we're citing when it comes to this research. That's also important because the more often that we continue to cite our people and make sure that their work is amplified, that's when we can continue to build on the stories that have already been told and remind folks that we stand on the shoulders of giants. Exactly. So certainly got to continue that work. I do have to ask you this. How has your own identity and experiences shaped the lens through which you critique Black masculinity? Yeah.
You know, I'm in the process of writing this preface now. I grew up in greater Atlanta area. And I remember working at a fast food restaurant in high school. And, you know, when you're a Black teenager, young Black boy in these kind of fast food spaces, you are cleaning the bathrooms and taking out the trash. I was taking out the trash, and while I'm doing that, I'm seeing this car in the drive-through, and this man is hitting this woman. And the line is not moving. I've clearly got enough time to muster what little courage I had. I end up probably doing what I would not advise my kids to do. I go and open her door. We go into another neighboring kind of restaurant storefront, and I have her call whomever to come and get her. But I remember coming home triumphantly that night and telling my single mother that I'm a man. Like today, it happened. Like it was like that.
It just clicked.
Just like that. And she's, you know, dealt with intimate partner violence, domestic violence, I think, kind of throughout her life.
Your mom?
My mother.
Okay.
And I think this was a way of me feeling like I could be seen, but also feeling like I see her.
Yeah.
And so I say all of that to say that, like, out of that moment, even as instantaneous and maybe ridiculous as it was, to say like I'm a man, right? Or like a raisin in the sun, Mama Lena, you know, by the end of it, you know, he didn't come into his manhood today. That there are worlds and possibilities of what it means to shape and be kind of a man. And so these moments, coupled with, I shared earlier, being a young father and what that has meant. You know, I had my son at the end of my sophomore year, when I was an undergrad. Had my daughter while I was writing my dissertation. Like, you know, any kind of academic, any kind of movements, advances that I've been able to make, my wife has been able to make, we've done them with the kids there. And that's been integral to how I've like just moved. And it's informed like my thinking on masculinity, my thinking on parenting, and so much more.
What do you hope audiences take away from your work as a scholar and cultural critic?
Yeah. You know, it is so easy to think you know what Blackness is, to think you know what or who Black women are, or who or what Black men are. And I think so much of my work is invested in having us sit with and question what we think we know about Black men. And really looking for, if you have any assumptions associated with kind of these things, then how can you go through and really question and interrogate what those assumptions are. Because Black men are whole folks. You know, I like to watch a bunch of movies. Hate the fact that kind of the universal story, like somebody's having a sleepy Saturday morning, that's generally a white story. Because whiteness is oftentimes understood to be universal.
Absolutely.
Toni Morrison was asked, why does she only write about Black people?
And she got it right together.
Right. Right. Because the assumption was that Black people can't stand in as the universal human experience.
That's what I mean about getting the right subject, not just right subject matter experts, but using our people as the subject matter experts when it comes to their expertise, because oftentimes that's not what we do. I know that's going to pick up. Sorry. I think that's where he went. Yeah. He went to go and talk to him. I saw him leave. Yeah. So I'm going to wait till that goes. Dang, I was about to get into it too. Man. Because when it comes to, I'll just say this, whether we can use it or not. When it comes to subject matter experts, again, it's not seen as the norm. Like if we bring you on to do something in other places, oftentimes that's seen as, oh, this person can do that too. What do you mean? The same way you're thinking about all these other experts that you bring on, and no one's gonna call in and say, oh, you only have all these white people. This is my show. And nobody's gonna call in and say, oh, you got all these white people on, but let me bring on 5 brothers one week or 5 sisters in 1 week. It's gonna be like, oh, well, we need some diversity. Now, you weren't saying that 3 weeks ago when we had 5 experts who don't look like me. So anyways, I'm happy that you mentioned that, because I think that is so important when it comes to telling and claiming and reclaiming our stories, especially in a day and age where it seems like those stories, I gotta ask you this. I know it's only so much you can probably say, but when it comes to education and the books and all the things that is being done right now, in so many ways, people can paint it however they want to paint it, but in so many ways to really rewrite the narrative of what people understand about our history. When you go from, and I'm sure you got way more knowledge on this, but when you go from calling slavery and the enslaved to indentured servitude, whatever they want to call it these days, how are you handling that as an educator? I know it's only so much you can do in your classroom, but how are you handling that?
Yeah, no, I mean, it is difficult. I am fortunate enough to be at TCU, where it is a private institution, and it is not, wrapped up and bound up in kind of what's happening at the state legislature in the same way that other institutions are right now. UNT just had to remove, I think, race and gender from a number of their courses, like in the title. I know colleagues at University of Texas and
Texas
elsewhere
A&M,
they're
alma mater,
struggling right now with this, but it's definitely in the water. And I will say that there have been moments where I have been able to benefit from societal pushes and investments. I taught a class on Black feminism, and it was right after I'm gonna forget Beyonce's album that came out.
Cowboy Carter?
Lemonade? No. Before Lemonade. What was before Lemonade?
Oh, the Beehive gonna get me. Beyonce? That was the name of it? Thank you. We got a beehive in the background.
Yes. Well, and she had like put so much energy around this kind of pop feminism. She had Chimamanda Adichie on there, defining feminism, doing all of these things. And I could see, as students were entering the classroom, the impact that this broader moment was having on their thinking, and how that gave us a foundation to start from. I'm seeing a bit of the inverse now, right? Where it is students who are frustrated that they didn't learn something. How could they not know, any of these kind of massacres, or any of the kind of real ways that Jim Crow was kind of a mundane, in-your-face kind of event, and they are frustrated. Or as I just got finished teaching a Black masculinity class this past fall, students come in. And you're doing great work here, but podcasts are largely this space where the manosphere and kind of misogyny.
You better talk about it. Come on.
Can run rampant, right?
I was hoping you was gonna get to this.
and so and this is what students come into the classroom with, right? They come in knowing the Andrews and the whomevers, and then that becomes part of the fodder in the conversation for what's happening in the classroom. And so in the same ways that there was a kind of pop feminist kind of push, I think in the 20-teens, I'm feeling like there's a pop like misogyny happening right now, to where young men and some young women are like entering into the classroom space, not realizing the way that gender is being informed for them before they even get there.
That is so good. Why is that though? What is it? Background? Is it because of the ideas and imagery that we've seen, or that generation has seen coming up? Because oftentimes there are some seasoned podcast hosts out there doing some things too, but a lot of times it's a younger generation too, who's perpetuating some of the things that they've seen and or heard. And I guess I'm just wondering, what can we do, one, to continue to make sure that we're getting the right information out there, but also where's some of that coming from?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's interesting that I feel like students, and we talked about it a little bit before, they're not doing the reading that they would need to. And I think that's as a society. Right?
Absolutely.
I don't want to say it's this younger generation, but folks are not reading or are reading in different ways. And even though we are pulling away from each other as people, we still desire some kind of contact. Mm-hmm. And I think that largely comes in the form of what we consume in terms of the media, our media consumption. And so, and it has the ability to then function as an echo chamber, unfortunately. And so you have folks that are not being able to read, or via laws and legislations that are happening, or the desire to not read. And what you get is a kind of mass body of people who think that they know. And you talked so compellingly earlier about standing on giants and the citational and the pulling back to move forward. My big concern is that folks don't know where to look, don't know how to pull, don't know who to look back to. And so, I think that's part of what my why is right now in the classroom, is trying to make sure that when students are reaching and wanting more, that they know where to find it.
What else do you have for anyone who might be listening to this, young, seasoned, older, in between? What advice do you have to them about just making sure that the narratives, the storytelling continues, but also making sure that when you do receive some type of information that you've either heard, read, or watched on television, what have you, that you don't become that, echo chamber for that information that's clearly not the right thing to do and or say. So what advice do you have for people that are listening to this that you really want to get across, especially as you're in the process of creating this new book, writing this new book?
Stillness, I think, is something that we have largely moved away from in this moment. Things used to take time to mature. Thoughts, ideas, people, and things have. There's been a desire for more instant, more in this moment, and it has really thwarted our ability to have things come to term, to allow it to mature, to allow it to have its season. And so, if you feel like you're reading something or seeing something, instead of just hitting the retweet without reading it, because that happens, what does it mean if you look at it from a few different sources? If it is too good to be true, how can you go about doing your homework? How can you find the most non-biased, objective kind of spaces to look for material? And what does it mean for you to sit and process a thing?
Correct.
Without needing to bring it up. I start each one of my classes by asking my students, what's new since the last time I've seen you? And it's a way for us to connect the dots between what's happening in the world to maybe what we're studying. Yeah. And with the election this past semester and our focus on gender, part of what that was, how is gender informing the election? Right. But when students bring something to me, and they'll oftentimes want my reaction to a thing, I'll tell them like, I need to read more about that. Or I need to sit with that a minute, in hopes that I'm performing for them a kind of stillness and a kind of meditativeness, so that they're not just jumping in or feeling like they've got to have, an idea on this subject that they don't even know fully themselves. Yeah.
And I think oftentimes, especially you mentioned like the whole podcast world and everybody can have a microphone these days. And I think oftentimes people are not taking the time to truly research whatever it is they are putting into the atmosphere. Exactly. And I think stillness, as you mentioned, is something that we can all practice and practice a little bit more often as it relates to all of the work that we're doing to make sure that we're putting the right information out there. A lot of times people want to respond quickly, and instead of responding, you should say, you know what, I need to go and get some more information about that. Allow me to research a little bit more, and I can try to come back to you next week, next class time, you know, and give you an answer. And I think that is so important to any of the work that we're doing. Where can people find you?
They can find me on Twitter, Prof. I think it's Prof BJM.
Now, you really don't be on Twitter if you don't know your Twitter name. As a matter of fact, we going to get him off Twitter because,
it don't need to be. Yeah, well.
One day.
It's X now. Formally.
Whatever it's called, child.
And then, I'm at the university. They can definitely reach out. I'm definitely looking to connect more with community.
Yeah.
And see how what has largely been just kind of on the page or on campus can be in the community a little bit more. Fort Worth, Arlington, et cetera.
Yeah, because I've researched a lot of professors at TCU in preparation for this show. And there's a lot of work that y'all are doing on campus that people need to know about. And I hope that as part of this conversation that we're having now, that we can continue to push that work out there as best we can. So, all right. Thank you so much, Doc. Appreciate it.
Thank you.